International relations expert Professor Seyed Marandi from the Faculty of World Studies at the University of Tehran in Iran is on Skype for some insights into this development. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we've seen earlier on President Rouhani being unrelenting. As a matter of fact, he was reading the Riot Act to the US and the EU troops in the Middle East, lashing them out for their presence in the Middle East, saying that they are compromised on the peace and the security there. And he also said that the US troops are insecure in the region and the EU troops might be in danger tomorrow. What does he mean by this? Is that a threat?
Well, I think the very fact that the Iraqi parliament has called on foreign troops to leave the country, and the prime minister has called on them to leave the country, and now they're threatening the Iraqi government, the Americans are threatening the Iraqi government with sanctions and punishment and confiscation of their assets abroad. I think that it's only natural for the Iranians to support the Iraqi people in their quest for liberation against American occupation. And the Europeans, of course, as we always see, they pretend to have a more humane face when it comes to global hegemony and oppression. But at the end of the day, they're always following American policy. And even though they grumble about Trump, they obey Trump whenever he presses them.
Yeah, but then the question is the threat leveled at the EU troops stationed in the Middle East, saying that they might be in danger tomorrow. Danger from what? And danger from who?
Well, the Iraqi parliament and the prime minister and the Iraqi armed forces are all united, as well as the Iraqi parliamentarians and political parties that have parliamentarians in parliament. All of them are united in saying that the Americans must go. And the Iraqi armed forces, especially the Popular Mobilization Force, which has been attacked by the Americans repeatedly. The Americans have murdered their deputy head. This is the force that spearheaded the defeat of ISIS in Iraq. They are outraged by the U.S. imperial behavior in their country, and therefore things will not be looking good for the United States in the future. And the Iranians will definitely support the people of Iraq and any resistance, any legitimate resistance to the end of American and Western occupation.
Now, President Trump has frequently offered to hold negotiations with the Iranian, while, of course, continuing to tighten the screws with regards to the sanctions that he again imposed a few days ago on Iran. I know that the last time I chatted to you, you said that there was no such quest for a truce coming from the Americans. But let's not forget that earlier on, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif on Wednesday saying that they're not interested at all in negotiation with the Americans, while Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said last year that Tehran would never talk to the United States. What seems to be the problem here when a possibility of a truce is on the horizon?
No, Ayatollah Khamenei never made such a statement. Ayatollah Khamenei said that as long as the United States is in violation of the nuclear deal, and as long as it is not abiding by its obligations, and as long as it's preventing other countries from carrying out their obligations, there will be no talks between Iran and the United States. And the European Union, they too are in full violation of the nuclear deal. They are in violation of all of their obligations. So this is a quite arrogant position for the Europeans to take, to call on Iran to abide by its commitments when the Europeans are not abiding by their commitments. But in addition to the fact that the United States is in full violation of its obligations and its commitments within the framework of the nuclear deal, now that Trump has murdered a senior government official and has carried out an act of war against Iran, there is no way that the Iranian president is going to meet a foreign leader that has such blood on his hand.
Well, President Rouhani said the military should also, elaborate further on the plane downing and that those responsible should apologize to the Iranian nation. Any possibility that this could happen?
Well, I think it's now becoming clear that there was never any intention for a cover-up. The very fact that the Iranians immediately after the plane crash invited international teams and experts to come to the country, and the fact that the Iranian armed forces preserved the black box and kept it safe and intact shows that the Iranians had goodwill. Immediately after the plane crashed, the Persian language media outlets owned by Western countries, such as BBC Persian, VOA Persian, Deutsche Welle Persian, Iran International, owned by Saudi Arabia, as well as many other media outlets owned by Western governments or funded by Western governments, along with thousands of an online army that is being funded by the US and Saudi Arabia in Albania, the MEK terrorist organization, which during the Iran-Iraq war fought for Saddam Hussein. They have been taken to Albania and they're kept in camps. And they work day and night, thousands of them, 3,000-4,000 people, online in waging psychological warfare against Iranians with the help of Twitter, Facebook, and other Western and American online entities. So they were waging a war, and they were creating this they were feeding this conspiracy theory in Iran that there was a cover-up. And initially, a lot of people were confused and they felt angry that the government was indeed carrying a cover-up. But then, when it became clear that from day one, foreign experts were invited into the country, the black box was safe and sound, it became clear that this was simply a Western propaganda operation to weaken Iran's internal solidarity. So what the president has said and what everyone is saying is that the investigation in Iran needs to continue to find out exactly what happened. But it is becoming clear that there are some certain odd elements in this case. The transponder of the plane went off 30 seconds before the missile struck. And when a transponder turns off, that means that the plane is no longer sending out identification. And this is something that the Iranians find very mysterious, because when a plane no longer sends out this identification, that means it's seen as a hostile entity, or that it's seen as a suspicious object in the air, to say the least. And under those circumstances, obviously, that creates a great concern for those who are operating surface-to-air defense systems. So many Iranians are now wondering why the transponder on the plane was off, what caused it, was it intentional, was there electronic warfare involved, especially because there were blips on the Iranian radar, apparently, that there were incoming missiles coming from the south of the country. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered, but also there are internal questions within the system that need to be answered as well.
Now, in another development, Professor Marandi, we do understand that Qasem Soleimani played a very important role in the Iran and Russia, relations. As a matter of fact, it has since come to light that he persuaded the Kremlin to intervene in the Syrian war on behalf of Bashar al-Assad's regime during an unofficial visit to Moscow in July 2015. So what's the possibility of Soleimani's killing with regards to strengthening Putin's hand in Syria and Iraq?
Well, I wouldn't call the Syrian state a regime, because that is a term that Europeans and Americans use when they want to antagonize a country. Tomorrow, if South Africa refuses to abide by Western demands, it will be called a regime. So it sort of justifies Eurocentric and arrogant behavior and imperial behavior from the West. But the General Soleimani, in I think it was 2015, went to Moscow because until then it was the Iranians and Hezbollah who were helping the Syrian army confront ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups that Western governments and Saudi Arabia and neighboring countries like Turkey were aiding. And they were advancing on Damascus. Initially, Iran was not involved in Syria, but in 2013, when these extremist groups approached Damascus and were about on the verge of capturing the city, Iran became involved. And they continued to be involved. And then finally, General Soleimani in 2015 went to Moscow, spoke to President Putin, and asked for him to give air support and that the Iranians would increase their troop presence on the ground in response. And that effectively helped further turn the tide against ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the other extremist groups that the United States and its allies were supporting. And this is one of the extraordinary facts of history that will come out later. Right now, the West is silent, but these extremist groups were created by the Western powers with the Saudis and others. And in fact, Trump once himself said that Obama created ISIS. And he once himself admitted that Iran was fighting ISIS. And then he goes and murders the Iranian senior official, which is unprecedented in contemporary world history, that an official of a country is murdered by an official by another regime, like the regime in Washington. And then, of course, when ISIS went into Iraq, the United States refused to help the Iraqi government, and General Soleimani personally was sent to Baghdad to lead the defense of the city, and to the Kurdish-held city of Erbil to lead the defense of that city to prevent them from falling. So if it wasn't for General Soleimani, Baghdad, Damascus, these two whole countries would have been under the control of groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and their affiliates, if not more countries.
All right, Professor Seyed Marandi, a great discussion there. Thank you so much for your reflections and your insights. Much appreciated. That was international relations expert, Professor Seyed Marandi from the Faculty of World Studies at the University of Tehran in Iran. He was just chatting to us live via Skype.